This Saturday, South Bend will set the stage for some of the biggest stars in college football that hope to shine in one of the sport's biggest rivalries as the USC Trojans take on the Fighting Irish under the lights at Notre Dame Stadium. Legacies will be written and bragging rights will be claimed. It's USC Notre Dame, Saturday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time on NBC and Peacock.
What do you take away from playing with Cooper for the first time in a game?
The game comes really easy. It just flows kind of naturally, and being able to ask questions and kind of see what the coverage is and what we were kind of expecting before the game, what we talked about through the week happened right before our eyes. It never turns out there.
So people shouldn't drop you from their fantasy teams. That's what it comes down to, right?
I don't know.
That was Puka Nacua. He doesn't want to tell you that you should not drop him from your fantasy team because that would be insane. Puka Nacua leads the love list for pass catchers here, guys. We finally got to see him play with Cooper Kupp, and really not much changed for Puka Nacua. Still an effective target that can play alongside Cooper Kupp. So, Matthew, he comes in as wide receiver 10 for you this week against the Cardinals.
He's clearly a wide receiver 1. He played 100% of the snaps last week. He saw a 32% target share with Cooper Kupp on the field. And then you think about this matchup with Arizona, which is so great. They bottom 5 in the NFL in both receptions and most yards allowed to wide receivers. They allow the 3rd highest catch rate to opposing wide receivers. And by the way, so for my love-hate today, which is available, you can read it for free on NBCSports.com, rotoworld.com. I did an AMA, Ask Matthew Anything. And one of the questions that I didn't get to use, I got so many great questions and I had to cut it down, but one of the questions I got to use is, have you ever seen Puka Nacua and Danny Rojas in the same room? Of course, Danny Rojas, one of the great AFC Richmond players from Ted Lasso. And the answer is no, you haven't seen him.
No, that's a good call. He's a very happy man, Puka Nacua.
Yeah, he always smiles.
Again, yeah, football is life.
Yeah, leading the league in targets and receptions, as everyone predicted. I think the big thing with Nacua is that he got 11 targets in a game with Cooper Kupp. And Cooper Kupp, there's no restrictions on Cooper Kupp. Right. He's just Cooper Kupp. And also the big thing there is they only had the ball for 22 minutes because the Eagles kept on the, as you call it, the bush, the brotherly shove. They just could not get off the field. And so the fact that he was still able to produce as he did, that's almost his flaw these days, Puka Nacua.
100%. And by the way, Rams have the 4th highest implied team total when you look at the numbers on DraftKings. Real quickly, I just want to point out that as we talk about the fact this my Ask Matthew Anything, my love-hate column, I want to give a shout out here. So I didn't get to use the Danny Rojas question, but one question I did use was Wade Garrett. It was my favorite question. Wade Garrett gave me my favorite question. He drinks for free. I can't repeat the question on air. You'll have to go check out the column at NBCSports.com, rotoworld.com. But Wade drinks for free today at the happy hour.
Our next one here, Jay, Adam Thielen, who has been the guy for Bryce Young and also Andy Dalton at one point of this season for the Carolina Panthers. He comes in as a top 15 wide receiver against the Dolphins in a game that they're underdogs by 2 touchdowns. A lot of throwing expected.
Yeah, and the thing is, with fantasy, the yards don't have to matter, Matthew. They don't have to contribute towards a victory. They just need to happen. And I think that it was good that Bryce Young showed last week that he can compile garbage time yards, which I think was a question mark. But the fact that he was able to move the ball against Detroit's prevent defense, I think bodes well for people like Adam Thielen going forward. Adam Thielen, who just looks more spry than he has in previous years, and he's clearly the guy for Bryce Young.
Yeah, by the way, that's been described to me as well. I look more spry than I think I have in years as well. You mentioned the usage, right? He's had at least 1 red zone target in 3 of the last 4 games. 4 straight games with at least 7 receptions, averaging over 11 targets in that stretch. And so again, game script, right, as you suggest, thinks that they'll be throwing a ton. Well, get this. The Dolphins, as good as they are on offense, they're actually tied for the 2nd most receptions allowed to the slot this year, which is obviously where Thielen runs the majority of his routes. I'm as a top 12 wide receiver. I don't know how long it's going to last, but for this week, he's a wide receiver 1.
Another wide receiver that comes in the top 15, Calvin Ridley, who he's got the Colts again. We saw what he was able to do against the Colts in week 1, 8 catches over 100 yards and a touchdown, Barry. It looks like, and Trevor Lawrence played really, really well last week in London against the Bills. I think that helps out here as well.
It really does. Look, that first game against Indianapolis in week 1, 8 for 101 and a touchdown on 11 targets. Colts are bottom 10 in both fantasy points and yards allowed to wide receivers this season. We should see a decent amount of targets for Calvin Ridley. I really like Trevor Lawrence in this game as well. Hint about what might be coming up later. And so Ridley, who's seen 7 or more targets in 4 or 5 games this season, well, get this. Wide receivers that have seen at least 7 targets against Indianapolis this year are averaging almost 20 fantasy points per game. Give me Calvin Ridley as a top 15 wide receiver. He's my number 14 wide out in week 6.
I think the other thing with Ridley is that often you expect players like rookies to potentially get better as the season goes on, as they become more accustomed with the offense. You'd also expect the guy who hasn't really played in 3 years to get better as the season goes on, as he gets more of a rapport with Trevor Lawrence. Think back to that Kansas City game in particular, where they were just like slightly off with their timing, and Ridley could have had a touchdown. He could have had a lot more yards and catches in that game. So I would expect that he is a guy who should get better as the season progresses.
Yeah, and earlier on the injury report, we showed Zay Jones did not practice with a knee injury as well. So expect a lot of targets, obviously, for Ridley in this game. How about Logan Thomas against the Falcons, coming in Barry's rankings, Jay, as tight end 12. We've seen a spry Logan Thomas recently as well.
Very spry. Matthew's man, Logan Thomas, who
Yeah, sure.
makes it into the show every single day somehow. I'm not really sure how, but I think you raised the point yesterday, Matthew, that Sam Howell is under pressure so much that he often just needs to get the ball out.
Yeah.
And who's he get it out to? The tallest person in front of him, who's in the middle of the field, in Logan Thomas. And clearly they have a rapport. Howell does not have a rapport with Terry McLaurin or Jahan Dotson for some reason, but Logan Thomas seems like his guy.
Yeah, he's had at least 40 receptions in 3 of the past 4 games. He's scored in 2 of those. It's a good match with the Falcons. 4 of the 5 tight ends to face Atlanta this year have scored at least 12 fantasy points. They allow the second most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. And you think about Eric Bieniemy's offense coming from Kansas City, obviously. I'm not saying Logan Thomas is Travis Kelce, but you do know that the tight end is part of that offensive scheme.
All right, a couple others receiving votes. Jacoby Myers, who has been a target monster when healthy in that Raiders offense. Jordan Addison, of course. Justin Jefferson is down for at least a couple weeks now. Josh Downs, who's looked really good with Gardner Minshew when Minshew has played. Rashee Rice, who is starting to pick up some steam as a rookie in the Chiefs offense. And then Tyler Conklin, of course, Matthew, at tight end against the Eagles.
Yeah, I mean, Jacoby Myers, obviously the revenge game that everyone's been talking about. They've had it circled on the calendars all offseason as well, going back to play the Patriots. Look, he's had a 32% target share in the 3 games that he's played with Jimmy Garoppolo. Like a 32% target share. You saw it on Monday night as well. Again, he's always looking for him. He's averaging over 21 fantasy points per game. So I like him. Jordan Addison, first opportunity without Justin Jefferson on the field. He's been moving up. He's had 4 games so far this year where he's had at least 5 targets. 15.5 fantasy points is what he's averaging in there. Obviously, Justin Jefferson not being in this game vacates 10 targets per game. Some of it's been touchdown influence, that 15.5, like he's had some big plays, but still, that's going to be an opportunity for him, especially against Chicago, who are tied for the 3rd most touchdowns allowed to opposing wide receivers. We talked about Gardner Minshew. He's starting this week. We talked about him when the Anthony Richardson injury came down, but in case you missed that show, Josh Downs is going to be a thing. As long as Gardner Minshew's under center, Josh Downs is going to be a thing. You talked about how good he is in the slot. He's had a 25% target share in the 3 games that Minshew has played. There's a connection there. I'll talk about Rashee Rice real quickly. Leads all qualified wide receivers in targets per route. He leads all the Chiefs in red zone targets. Denver allows the highest catch rate to wide receivers. Rashee Rice is coming. It's a matter of like when he gets more routes, but when he's out there, he's earning a target at a very high rate on them. And finally, Tyler Conklin, your guy.
Yeah, my guy.
You know,
Yep. Fire him up.
I know you
Fire
love
him
some
up.
Tyler. Look,
So does Zach Wilson lately.
look, 4 straight games with at least 5 targets, right? And we death, taxes, start your tight ends against the Eagles. He's a top 12 play for me this week.
Yep. Connor, how good do you think Jordan Addison can be while Jefferson is out? Like, is he a guy who can be a bona fide wide receiver 1? Think about someone like, who'd rather have while Jefferson is out? Jordan Addison or like Devontae Smith?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think I would still take Addison, which is,
Wow.
it sounds crazy, but
It does.
it's just weird with the Eagles offense. The amount of goose egg type games Devontae can have when A.J. Brown goes up. And sure, swings the other way. Sometimes Brown doesn't have a good game. And Addison's consistency is why I would say him there when Jefferson is out. It's not a conversation when Justin Jefferson is healthy, but you will see incredible fantasy consistency from Jordan Addison these next couple weeks.
Yep. They just got too many guys in Philadelphia, and they're too good at running the ball,
Right.
and the team's too good, so they have a lead all the time. And so there's just like the drives go by, and you forget that Devontae Smith is out there because everything at the moment is going to A.J. Brown. Dallas Goedert obviously had his big game. I think Devontae Smith is too good that eventually he will just get his.
But just the ceiling on Addison, I think, is the headline there. I think I'd rather have Smith. But like, if I said to you, like, who would you rather have? Jordan Addison or DK Metcalf the rest of the way? Like, I'm just
Right.
Jordan Addison or DeAndre Hopkins.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean?
I would take Addison.
I would take Addison. Yeah.
Right. I mean, like, we love Hop, you know, but again, that offense is
Really
somewhat challenged. Like, he's in that, he's top 20-ish range for sure the rest of the way. And anyway, really like him this week as well. I think he's a top 30 wide receiver. I want to see it a little bit more, but he's got top 20 upside.
Yep.
Let's jump into the hate list for pass catchers, which is led by somebody that was called a decoy after being on this show earlier, Deebo Samuel.
Yeah.
He's got the Browns. You mentioned some bad weather potentially there. And the fact is, too, I mean, this is an offense that has a lot of weapons here, Jay, that you never really know when it's going to be a Deebo week if it is one.
Maybe a little galaxy brain, but maybe the weather helps Deebo a little bit because they got to throw shorter passes, maybe more yards after the catch. Probably not going to be the conditions where Brock Purdy can cook like he did against Dallas with those in-breaking routes deep in the middle of the field to Ayuk. I think it is instructive that the one game that Deebo really went off was against the Giants on Thursday night when Brandon Ayuk was out. I just worry that when this team is fully healthy, there's just not enough there, not enough opportunity for Deebo to live up to his ADP.
He's had 3 total targets the last 2 weeks, 3. Now, again, I think some of it is because he's been less than 100% healthy and they haven't needed to, and so he's been a little bit of a decoy, but 3 targets in 2 weeks is 3 targets in 2 weeks. Like, it ain't great. 37.5 over-under, it's the lowest on the slate, right? We expect there's like a 65% chance of rain, possibly up to 35-mile-per-hour winds in this game as well. So offense, we expect to be challenged, especially if P.J. Walker's under center for the Browns. They may not need to do much to beat Cleveland. They may just be like, you know what, we're just going to try to, like, just grind it out and just get out of this game with, you know, a 13-6 win kind of thing against them. Cleveland, by the way, for the struggles that they may have offensively, especially against the Niners, they're really good defensively. The fewest receptions, fewest yards, fewest fantasy points allowed to wide receivers are the Cleveland Browns. You see it there on your screen. First in the NFL in all those ranks against wide receivers, and they're tied for the fewest touchdowns allowed to opposing wide receivers. Only one wide receiver has scored double-digit fantasy points against San Francisco this year on fewer than 7 receptions. Right? I mean, so again, like, you're going to need volume to get there against the Browns, and because whether it's because of injury, because of so many mouths to feed, because of the weather, like, does Deebo Samuel get that kind of volume against him? I don't think so. I'm at wide receiver 25, so he's merely a mid-tier flex for me. That's the lowest I think I've had Deebo all year. It's the lowest I've had him that I can remember.
Yep.
But, you know, yes.
As I think
hate list is all about expectations, and I've lowered expectations for Deebo Samuel this week.
With that Cleveland defense, one, the betting market treats it as the best defense in football, and I think maybe people were a little thrown off the scent because they gave up 28 to Baltimore. Baltimore kept on getting the ball at like the 20-yard line because DTR, he just wasn't ready for that moment, and Cleveland just had no chance with field position. So that is still an elite defense. When you add in the weather and the conditions, I wouldn't expect that it's going to be a huge day for an otherwise awesome San Francisco offense.
We'll keep the conversation right with this game because Amari Cooper is the next player on the hate list for pass catchers, and we can't repeat it enough. Bad wind, chance of rain, lowest total on the slate, Barry, and that's why Cooper comes in as wide receiver 20, two spots after Deebo Samuel. Not to mention, P.J. Walker probably has a big effect in this if he has to play.
Yeah, exactly. Again, San Francisco also very good against the pass. They've been very good at shutting down passing offenses as well. And so you think about that game last week, the last game that the Browns played when Deshaun Watson was out, Amari Cooper, 1 catch on 6 targets. And so, look, they're putting P.J. Walker in because they feel better about him than they do Dorian Thompson-Robinson at this point of DTR's career. But still, like, you don't feel great about Amari Cooper in bad weather with a backup quarterback against the Niners. He's just outside. Volume may get him there, but I'm at wide receiver 27. Again, he's slightly lower than Deebo, but they're both just merely, flex plays.
Our next one here, Jay, Terry McLaurin against the Falcons comes in as wide receiver 36 for Barry this week. He's got a matchup with A.J. Terrell, and quite frankly, we've talked about it all the time. This isn't an offense that leans on Terry McLaurin.
No, and the fact that Sam Howell dropped back, over 50 times against the Bears, and McLaurin had, 4 or 5 receptions, that's a concern. I would think that often when you see things like this, like we did with A.J. Brown when he didn't get the targets in a game earlier in the season, there is an overcorrection for the star wide receiver. So I would expect that they're going to try and throw to Terry McLaurin, but it just hasn't happened. And look, he came into the season with injury concerns as well. So I'm not sure if that is playing a part in his diminished performance and just his diminished target share. But certainly the matchup against A.J. Terrell isn't ideal. Terry McLaurin, I think, is going to have a hard time living up to his ADP the way this offense is trending.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with it. Like, listen, if everything else was working, I wouldn't worry that much about Terrell because we've seen Terry McLaurin. He's been up against Darius Slay, and he's been fine. He's cooked him. Like, he hasn't been able to be, quote, fully shut down. Honestly, what shuts him down more than opposing cornerbacks is the offense.
Right.
Like the bad quarterbacks he's had to play, the bad offensive line, suspect play calling at times. But it is not a great matchup. You mentioned A.J. Terrell, who is like one of the better corners in the NFL. He is, I think, one of the elite shutdown corners in the NFL. Falcons allow the fifth fewest fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. You think about that 10% target share last week. He's actually, while that was a season low, he's only had one game this year with more than 6 targets. And Sam Howell's been throwing a decent amount. So it's weird, but just Bieniemy, again, taking that Kansas City offense, which is just spread the ball around. And it's weird given the talent disparity between McLaurin and a lot of the other guys on Washington, but that's just sort of what they're doing, whether it's a Howell thing or Bieniemy thing or he's not 100% healthy, but he's had under 55 receiving yards in 4 out of 5 games this year, Terry McLaurin. So again, for all of you guys that call me Travis Homer over here because I do love my Commanders and future Hall of Famer Sam Howell, I don't think this is a Terry McLaurin week. I hope I'm wrong. I would love to be wrong. I don't think I'm going to be. I have him outside my top 30 this week. It's I think you like the Falcons to cover the 2.5.
I think so. Imagine the Commanders win, they'll be what, 3-3?
Yeah.
Feels like they're 0-5.
But I don't. But if you look at their upcoming schedule, if you look at the Commanders' upcoming schedule, like it's so brutal, dude. Like they're not going anywhere this year.
Yep.
I kind of hope they lose. At this point, I want them to lose.
Yep. Me too.
8-9 isn't coming.
But because I'm a
8-9
diehard
is
fan of the
inevitable.
company, do you guys feel that way? That like I've said that before on air, and people are like, you can't be a real fan if you're wanting them to lose.
That's not true at all. I lived
I'm
this
a
with
real-
the Jets.
Exactly.
I was heartbroken when they didn't get the Trevor Lawrence pick.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Like it was like the worst thing that could have happened.
1,000%.
What did Sam Darnold beat the Rams and Jared Goff? Was that the game?
They beat the Rams
Yeah.
and they won another. It's just
The Washington had a
Zach Wilson.
meaningless. The year before they drafted Chase Young, the Washington had a meaningless game against Miami, which was brutal that year. And Miami went down and got down by 1, and then they tried a 2-point conversion, and Washington defended and stopped it, and they ended up winning that game. If Miami scores that 2-point conversion, stupid Miami. If Miami scores that 2-point conversion, if Washington had just let them, Washington would have lost that game. That had the number 1 pick in the draft that year, and that have had Joe Burrow.
Yeah.
But no. Good thing we defended that 2-point pass. Anyway, so yeah, you know what? I'm a realistic fan, and so I would like us to get a very high draft pick. We have talent at various places.
Sometimes it goes the other way with those players, though, because Texans fans were feeling the same way, and now they got C.J. Stroud, who'd probably go number 1 over Bryce Young.
That's
true.
True. Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBCSports.com and RotorWorld.com, and I want to thank you so much for watching whatever it is you just watched, or if nothing else, being too lazy to click out of the autoplay after this video started, after whatever it is you actually wanted to watch finished. But now that you're here, I'd like to take a moment here to ask you respectfully now, okay? I'm asking you respectfully to subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. You'll get the latest Roto-World fantasy news headlines, all sorts of great shows, including my own Fantasy Football Happy Hour. So go subscribe now. Again, I'm asking respectfully.